Hari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Kupijana Vallabha Girivardhari Kupijana Vallabha Girivardhari Jasodanandana Bhajajana Ranjana Shodanandana Bhajajana Ranjana Jamunatira Banachari Jamunatira Banachari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Shri Radha Madhava Ki Jai Kantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Taigo Premanandi Hari Hari Bol. So welcome everyone. This class was especially designed for devotees in Australia because most times that are good here are not good there. But it seems it's an okay time for people who like to stay up late in Europe. And that's definitely a good time for everything west of where I am, west of New York. I'm not in New York, but west of New York, all of the United States. Then you go into Hawaii and you keep going west. And my geography isn't good, but I think you run into Indonesia, you run into Japan and Indonesia, and a little early for China, but definitely good time for you in Australia. So welcome everyone. And then as long as we're all locked down, I'm going to continue. Well, even if I'm not locked down, it's sometimes more difficult when I travel, but we're going to try to maintain this. It's 5 o'clock Saturday evening here, and for you it's 8 a.m. as far as I know, at least in certain parts of Australia. So we had decided, because of what's going on in the world today, that we would talk a little bit about what we can learn from the coronavirus, or what I say what we can learn, but I also think an apt title is what we should learn. What we can learn is one thing. What we should, I think there's some things we should learn. But having said that, I have come up with different things, most of which are sitting on my phone that I don't have access to, and I think this topic is going to take a long time. And I have some things written in my computer which I may refer to or may not refer to, but because there's so much that I can talk about just off the top of my mind before I go systematically down. But having said that, I would like you to share in the chat if there's any particular thing you're learning or you want to learn or you know you should learn. And plus, of course, you can ask questions. But I would like to see what you're learning or what you would like to learn. Sometimes there's a lesson, but we don't get it. So I want to begin with a meditation. And I was just thinking about this because I'm also giving a class 3 hours from now for devotees in Mexico City. And they wanted the topic to be how to deal with difficult situations and what to learn from them. So I was thinking about it. And of course, this is a difficult situation. So I think one of the big problems is that when there's trouble, when there's difficulty, when something is thrown at us that's unpleasing or we don't know how to deal with well, what we want to do is we want to look at our reaction. How do we react? And the reason I say we want to look at it, because generally, for most of us, the way we react to difficulty is consistent with all the difficulties we react to. It's not generally that we react to one difficulty in one way and another difficulty in another way and a third difficulty in another way. Generally, most of us react the same way to all difficulties. And just meditate on that, but that's very interesting. And I would like you to reflect on how you react to difficulty. Now, there are various reactions that people have, but try to think. Do you have a general response to difficulty, whether it's someone who hurts you or you're in a situation which is things aren't going the way you want them to, or a situation like today where everything, all our plans are kind of put on halt and so many additional problems are there. Try to think back to 9/11. What was your response to that? When there are problems in ISKCON or lapses in integrity and leadership, how do you respond? And so just meditate on that. Now, as you meditate on that and think about your response, think, do you have kind of a generalized way you respond when there's difficulty, for example? And I think also it's this question is easier to answer when you think of somebody else and say, well, how does this person respond when, let's say, when there's difficulty? Somebody wants to talk about it, somebody doesn't want to talk about it, someone doesn't want to think about it, somebody wants to think about it all the time, somebody gets angry, somebody wants to hide, somebody wants to fight, somebody becomes depressed, somebody wants to find a solution, gather people, start a revolution, start a movement. Someone else wants to sensationalize it. Someone else wants to attack people they think are causing the problem. So you can see there, avoiding. Don't want to think about it. Work more, yeah. So a lot of times being very busy is a method we use, kind of a universal method, daily method we use. I don't have time to think about it. I don't want to think about it, and so I can avoid thinking about it rather than facing it. And then, so here's the meditation for today, for this class, or at least where it's going to begin. And this is what I was thinking. How often have we reacted in somewhat a dysfunctional way to a problem? And of course the answer is a lot, but let's go deeper. How often has that reaction actually got in the way of what we want to achieve in our life or in our relationships? For example, I think the most obvious example is you get upset with someone who's dear. So it's not that you want a bad relationship with the person, but that's what you've just created. You actually want a good relationship. But your response is counterproductive. We were talking yesterday in the morning class about how sometimes when we become upset, we replace Krishna on the throne of our heart, we take him off, and then we put the person we're upset with on that throne, and we start shooting arrows at that person. So let's use that as an example, because I think this happens all the time. And when that happens, it's like we're putting our Krishna consciousness on hold so that now we can become upset about something. And so now the question that we need to be asking ourselves, we need to be meditating on, is how is my response to difficulty helping me get closer to my goals and helping me be the kind of devotee, the kind of person that I aspire to be? Or how is it doing the opposite? And this is a powerful meditation. It's a powerful question, because when you ask this question, you start to see that oftentimes our response mechanisms, or we could call them coping mechanisms, are highly conditioned. They're not conscious. They're subconscious. And then after we react in a certain way, we ask ourselves, why did I react that way? Or I wish I hadn't reacted that way, because it's conditioned. So we're often responding in ways that are antagonistic to the very things we're trying to achieve. But I think most of us, in the moment, and even perhaps after the moment, don't think like that. We just think, I was upset, I'm upset, they shouldn't have done this, this is wrong, that's wrong, and we kind of brew in upset, or we brew in our reactionary mode, which is maybe don't talk about it, don't face it, or face it and fight, or whatever it is we do. So this is such an important question. When you look at how you respond to anything in this world, and certainly now we're all forced to respond to this situation. It's natural because it's not normal. And people are worrying about the future, about the economy, obviously worrying if they're going to become ill, and the potential for a certain percentage, like I think 1.5%, this could kill us, or it could permanently damage us. So there's a lot of fear, definitely. Some people are not coping well with isolation, just not coping well with the whole situation. So now, when you ask the question, how is my response helping me or hindering me? It's like lights go off. But there's a problem. If you don't even know, or you don't clearly know where you want to go with your life, if you don't clearly know what your goals are, it's difficult to answer this question, because unless you know where you're going, how would you know if your actions and reactions to situations are helping you get there or not? So this is really important. I think many of us were not clear about where we want to go in life. And when you're not clear, it's easier, I would say it's easier to react to situations subconsciously due to our conditioning, because you don't really see the effects of the consequences, because you're not really so centered on the kind of person you want to be and where you want to go. And so you don't notice that certain actions are unhealthy, because you don't even see how it's preventing you from achieving what you want to achieve, because you're not even that clear on what you want to achieve. But the more you become clear about what you want to achieve, and specifically clear on the way you want to be and the way you don't want to be, and when I say clear, I mean it's conscious. We all know we should be a certain way as devotees, but it's not always conscious that I'm consciously thinking this is desirable, or this is how I need to be, this is how I want to be, this is how I desperately want to be, this behavior, this attitude, these actions would be pleasing to Guru and Krishna. When that's primarily on your consciousness, when that's clear, and it's 24/7 clear, and you live that, then when you're in situations which are difficult, and your tendency to react in a conditional way is there, as it is for all of us, the thought will come, how is this going to affect my goals and affect the behavior which I am trying to develop, or which I would say not trying, but is very important for me to develop. So that's where we're going to start with this talk. Is that clear? If it's not clear, ask a question, because this is important. This is something that was awakened within me many, many years ago. And it was a realization of how sometimes we are very out of alignment with where we want to go and how we're thinking and behaving in the current situation. Like we say, this is my goal, this is what I want to achieve. But then we're not always conscious that our actions are antagonistic or out of alignment. And so we need to be conscious, and we need to ask these questions, or this question. So this question is, okay, let's make it more practical. Yes, clear, good. So now we need to make this practical, because philosophy without practical application, it doesn't get us that far. So what's the practical reality? We're in different situations, difficult situations, every day, every other day, every third day, once a week, once a month, something really difficult. And then there's a tendency, if it's very, very difficult, to become, if we're very challenged, there's a strong tendency that we kind of, as we say in English, we lose it, or we blow it. We lose it. We lose our equilibrium, and then we respond in pathetic ways. It could be anger, it could be isolation. Sometimes we respond by criticizing everybody we think is responsible for my problems. Some very, very un-Krishna conscious way of responding, some very dysfunctional way of responding. This happens to all of us. And so now, if we're tempted by those situations to respond according to our universal global coping mechanism, which I hope now you're meditating on what that is. What's your go-to response? Anger, criticism, isolation, just extra work, go out and fix the problem, go out and beat somebody up, depression, dismay, pessimism, criticism, whatever your default setting is. Then when you tend to go into that default, just try to catch yourself and ask the question, is this behavior that I'm feeling impelled to act upon, this response, is this helping my Krishna consciousness? Is this helping me get closer to whatever are my goals? Or is it distancing me? Is it antagonistic? That's the question, that's the meditation. So now we're talking about what we can learn from this situation. So I would ask you, Sundari Radha says, isolate and work. And you don't have to think about it. Yeah, that's one mechanism. If you don't think about it, it doesn't bother you, which in some cases maybe that's healthy. But if it's a problem that you have to deal with, it's obviously not healthy. So now, let's look at the current situation. Let's ask ourselves, am I responding well? Am I responding in a Krishna conscious way? Am I using this as an impetus to look at this situation from the perspective of our Shastras, from the perspective of Guru, Sadhana, and Shastra? Excuse me, I have to plug in my, I'm all entangled here. I have to plug in my computer. But I have a chair that likes to swallow cables. You have a chair like that? Swallows cables. It like little, on the wheels, there's a little space. So when the cable's on the floor and you move around, it decides to swallow your cable. Okay. Excuse me. Now I completely forgot what I was saying. Yeah. What was I saying? Does anyone remember? Yeah. So, okay, yeah, I remember. So, I think one of the big lessons that we can learn from this situation is that it's very important to look at situations philosophically. Prabhupada wanted us to see everything philosophically. And when I say see things philosophically, it's a synonym for saying see things as they are, because we're not seeing it through the eyes of our conditioning or the modes of nature, or we're not seeing it through our own reactions and emotions, but we're seeing it through the philosophy, and that philosophy is reality. Okay. We have, Lucy's going to tell us about her reaction. The issue with me is dealing with these situations in recurrence, that is, when the people antagonizing you are the ones you live with. How do I navigate around that kind of situation? There's two ways to deal with that. And Prabhupada dealt with them in both ways. And one way is going to sound like a cop-out. But Prabhupada did this sometimes when he saw there was no other solution, is move away from those people. So sometimes when there was conflict with two leaders, he just separated them, gave them different projects. I would say one of the prime things I would think in a difficult situation is, how is this affecting my Krishna consciousness? Is it a toxic situation? Are the people I'm with toxic? And is this even dangerous for me? Is it, because we have to have a peaceful environment, and if the environment is too tamasic or rajasic and too agitating, it can be very detrimental. So we have to look at that. And the other thing I would say is, if you want to cope with it, just be compassionate and respectful, and keep a healthy distance in your interactions, or don't interact in a way that you expect anything from anybody. And then try to exemplify Vaishnava behavior, being respectful and kind. And I think a lot of times the toxicity of relationships is when we try to control them and they don't want to be controlled. And we just ask them to respect our space. That's how I would normally deal with it. Kasturi, yeah, I was almost going to go to South Africa, but anyway, we're in South Africa now, right? We're broadcasting. So Prabhupada wanted us to be looking at the world philosophically. And how do we look at the world philosophically? Well, we look at it through Prabhupada's teachings. How does he want us to see this? How does he see it? How did Bhaktivinoda Thakur see the world? How did Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur see the world? How did the sadhus in the conversations in Bhagavatam see the world? And by seeing and discussing things philosophically, you will find that is one of the best coping mechanisms for any situation. And so now we look at the world situation. And so we start talking about it philosophically. And sometimes when we're talking philosophically, we may not know all the answers, but we're in the general ballpark. We're understanding, okay, this must be some kind of global karmic reaction to the animal slaughter, to the killing of embryos in the womb, to the devastation of the rainforest, to the pollution and so forth. So we have a general idea that anything of this magnitude is a karmic reaction. And how do we know that? Well, Prabhupada said war is a karmic reaction to animal slaughter. And he said, if there's animal slaughter, there must be war. And he said some very heavy things about it, because I think animal slaughter today in the world is much higher than it was, let's say, at this time 100 years ago. And he said some very heavy things about the reactions. And I don't want to spoil your appetite, so I won't tell you, but they were very heavy around the area of deaths of large numbers of people on the planet if we continue this way. So that details we may not understand exactly, but we generally understand that things of this magnitude are reactions. And So we start talking about that. It's a difficult time. But we have to look at it philosophically, so we discuss amongst one another. This is the Krishna conscious coping mechanism. Yeah. Gopinath, your question is a little different. Anyway, I can address it. Just make it real life issues. I'm having problems seeing my job as a service. For Krishna, I really like what I do, but my enthusiasm. I stopped doing my sadhana. Chanting rounds, reading, I'm happy. Yeah. Well, your job's a service if you give money to Krishna. That's what makes it a service. But anything which is taking you away from sadhana is not healthy, is not good. So you have to. Okay, let's put this in perspective. It's a little digression, but I think it's an important point because everybody works. The Bhagavatam says the purpose of work is to make you Krishna conscious. Okay, so use that as a barometer. How is this helping me become Krishna conscious? Well, one sense you could say, well, if I didn't work, I would waste my whole day and I'd be on the internet and who knows where I'd end up on the internet and et cetera, et cetera. And so I need to keep busy, I need to do something, I need to make money and so forth. Okay, so that's great. We want to think how what I do every day can in some way be a support for my spiritual life, at least in some remote way. And I think one of the ways that working helps for a lot of us, even especially the ones who don't like their work, is it should make us more attached to devotional service, because we see the difference. This is work, and it's like, meh. And even if you like the work, it's still not the same as kirtan and hearing and chanting and so forth. But beyond that, the point is, work is just something we have to do to maintain the body, but we are here now in the human body to become Krishna conscious. That's the point. So if you allow the thing that you have to do to maintain your body to interfere with what you have to do to purify yourself to go back to Godhead, that is a huge mistake. It's backwards. It's not, the work is not that important. It's important up to a point. What's most important is your sadhana. What's most important is your purification and being Krishna conscious. So with that understanding, it's easier to balance. It's like, I have to give a certain amount of time every day to my spiritual life. That's absolutely essential. I am here. I've taken birth as a human being to become self-realized. And now I've met a bona fide spiritual master in a line of disciplic succession. I've been given the holy name. I'm on the path. Why would I be so foolish to allow work to sidetrack me from where I am at in my spiritual life that has taken me millions of lifetimes to get here? That doesn't make any sense. So if you put everything in that perspective, then it's much easier to balance, because now the priority becomes your self-realization, not your job. Your job is there to support your self-realization. Your self-realization is not there to support your job. Your job is to support your Krishna consciousness. So if you put it that way, then you can put everything in perspective. Now, I would also like to add, this is a problem for full-time devotees, especially full-time devotees who have the freedom to make their own schedules, who are not, let's say, living exactly under the guidance of the temple commander who's made a schedule for them, exactly what they do at every moment, but they have freedom. We use myself as an example. I have many services that I do and many choices to do. And I could choose, I have the freedom to choose to do something or put something on a back burner, and how many projects I work on and so forth. So I could also, of my own volition, overwork myself to the point where my hearing and chanting is minimized. I can do that, even though I'm fully engaged in devotional service. That's all I do. I don't have a separate job. So it's even a problem for devotees, because we could do so much, so be engaged in so much service that we neglect our sadhana. So sufficient sadhana has to be there, especially if you're working 8+ hours a day, then your sadhana is so important, because that's that time of day where you have to really nurture your Krishna consciousness. Now, Gopinath, if your goal is to be Krishna conscious, then, as we were saying in the beginning, I don't know if you heard in the beginning, but as we were saying in the beginning, if your goal is to be Krishna conscious and it's very clear, then you will be very sensitive to whatever you're doing and how it's affecting your Krishna consciousness, either helping it or hindering it. And so we need to become more sensitive to how certain things are hindering our Krishna consciousness. And if we're insensitive to that, we may engage in ways which harm our Krishna consciousness, and we're not aware of it, and we don't adjust it. So this is really, really important. If I'm doing anything that I think in some way is not helpful to my Krishna consciousness, then I should think about it and think, okay, why am I doing something that's not helping me advance further in my spiritual life? Hold on a second. I want to just get some more light coming over here, if it's possible. If I have the power to create more light, I have the power to open up the window shade. Okay, it's a little better. So, I think this is super important for us to be sensitive to everything we're doing and how that's affecting our Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, we end up doing things that are detrimental to our Krishna consciousness. And as I said in the beginning, I think, from my experience, we're not consciously fixed on our goal. It's not that important, and we're not that focused on our goal. And therefore, we can do things which are actually getting in the way of our goal, and it doesn't bother us, because maybe that goal isn't that important to us. So if Krishna consciousness is more important to you, then when you're doing something which is in some way not helping your Krishna consciousness, you'll be more aware of it, and you'll catch yourself, and you'll ask yourself, okay, is this going to help? Well, I was just since about October, I've been going through a few situations where people were, I'll just say, for lack of a better word, a few people were mistreating me. And so, in thinking about how to respond to it, which my normal reaction is, why respond at all? But sometimes the mistreatment was escalating to kind of absurd levels. And at the point where people were stealing money from me, lying to me. Actually a lot of money was stolen from me this year by people. I don't want to get into it, but it's a sad story. And so, thinking about how to deal with it, it came to a point where I had to decide, how much energy do I want to put into this? How important is it? And then I had to make a decision that at a certain point, at a certain threshold, it would be energy which would just be wasted. And it would be behavior that's not conducive to Krishna consciousness. And it would be behavior that's not indicative of someone who's Krishna conscious. So that was my conclusion. So I just said, okay, I made an effort to deal with this situation, and now I have to pull back. And like whatever happens, happens. Maybe someday these people will return the money they've stolen from me, or, well, let's just say, taken from me, and didn't return it. Maybe they won't. But I had to make a decision at that point. What's more important, my Krishna consciousness or the money? And then I thought, money comes, money goes. If Krishna wants you to have a lot of money, you'll have it. If he doesn't, you won't. and for whatever reason, this money has been taken, and it seems to be beyond my control. At this point, I think it's time to just step back, because I don't want to behave in a way that is not indicative of the way someone cultivating Krishna consciousness should behave, and I don't want to try to push for something that it seems that it's not going to happen. So we all will face situations like that where we'll think, what should I do in this situation? Should I fight it? Should I accept it as Krishna's arrangement? So we're all, and am I willing to compromise my behavior to attack the person who did something which was wrong? Will I stoop to that level? So these are the kinds of challenges that we all face, isn't it? Sometimes people do the wrong thing and we get upset, and sometimes we may attack them. So then we have to ask ourselves, how is my response going to further my service, and how is my response going to help in the spreading of Krishna consciousness? And how is my response going to help me, or how is my response going to hinder me? So sometimes you could say, morally, I'm justified in acting in a certain way. Because of what happened, I was wronged, I've been cheated, morally, I am justified in acting in a particular way. But then we have to ask ourselves, is that helpful? Is responding to that situation, even though morally it's laudable, it's correct, it's acceptable, spiritually, is it useful for anything? You could say, oh, well, it's useful because if you get the money, you can use that in Krishna service, or that would make your life easier. Okay, that's true. But to get that money back may require much energy and behaviors which are not maybe desirable for a devotee. So then we make that decision, no, I won't do that. And so I think that's an important point for all of us, because we're always in situations where we may be justified in our behavior, but that justifiable behavior may not be good for our spiritual life. And I think sometimes we make the mistake of sacrificing our spiritual life, maybe to get even with someone or get back, or for whatever moral reason, or a reason that's justifiable from the moral perspective, but not helpful from the spiritual perspective. So that's an important thought. Now we have a comment here, 2 comments, or more than 2. Yes, we have. This is Kasturi. I work and do some service at the temple and do at home. However, this situation has given me more time to chant, better knowing that I have more time and cook for my deities. Yeah. I am worried about work, but so grateful for the extra time at home. I listen to classes like yours and others. Yeah. So this is, I think this is the paradox of material existence, that sometimes things which are good spiritually are not always good materially, and things good materially are not always good spiritually. And ideally, what we're trying to get to in our life is a situation where our material situation does not undermine our spiritual situation, and our spiritual situation does not undermine our material situation, because sometimes that happens also. You give so much energy into your spiritual life, you neglect your material life. So we know, because of the nature of society and the nature of the economy today, we can't always be in ideal situations. And I always encourage devotees, start businesses, start your own business, because then you can engage devotees, work with devotees, make your own hours and so forth. Or better than that, move out of the cities and create communities and create businesses in those communities that can support many devotees. That I think is an important objective for our movement, and I think one of the lessons of what's happening now. If this pandemic continues too long, it could destroy the economy to such a degree that I think it would wake us up a little bit in terms of self-sufficiency. As I told at Hoxaja, I said, this is a warning now. I see this as a warning that self-sufficiency is important. I think I have a quote here about that. Or the quote is on my phone. Hold on. Let me see. No, I don't have it here. Okay, so Kitty says, I think it can also be the difference from what we get from our material life is a quick result, gross result, whereas our journey in Krishna consciousness is long, subtle. Excuse me. Yeah, instant gratification is always more attractive. So Kasturi assures me Krishna will provide for me. He always has. Sometimes at the, what do they call it? The 10th hour? What's that at the last moment? What's that saying? Is that it? At the 10th hour? What's that saying? Why am I going brain dead? That last moment. Yeah, sometimes Krishna's like, okay, you'll get it, but at the 9th hour, the 10th hour, what is it? The 7th hour? Krishna Karshani says, sometimes we focus on the goal of Krishna consciousness, but after some time in life, something else becomes more important. I'm wondering why. Is the reason for sadhana? You know, it can be different for different people. But I think if we adopt this mentality of trying to see everything philosophically and always discussing philosophy, it's going to help us tremendously. Because if we're doing that, it always keeps Krishna consciousness, the importance of Krishna consciousness in the forefront, because we're seeing the world through a Krishna conscious perspective. And that means we're seeing reality. We're seeing it as it actually is, not as we imagine it to be or not as we would desire it to be, but actually as it is. And so we're understanding things on the level of reality. And that it's hard. I think this is such an important point. It's hard to lose one's inspiration in spiritual life if you're always seeing things as they are. And you can turn that around and say, it's not unlikely to lose your inspiration if you're not seeing things as they are, but you're seeing things filtered through your own subjective consciousness. Now, one of the problems, our acharyas have explained this, if in order to be able to live within this reality and see it, you have to have some healthy level of Krishna consciousness. Because if you don't, you'll see things materially. And if you see things materially, it becomes an impetus to act materially. And when we see things materially, what it often means is we lose our faith in Krishna consciousness because we're not seeing the world as Krishna sees it. We're not experiencing the world as Krishna experiences it, or wants us to experience it, because we're not acting in a Krishna conscious way, so our consciousness is becoming contaminated. And so then we lose faith because it's not alive for us. And then, like Katie said, sense gratification, material gratification, it's immediate, it's there, it's easy to get, you experience it. It doesn't require any level of purity to experience it. It's right there to experience in the moment. So Krishna consciousness is there to experience, but it takes a little bit of work every day. And then you experience it, and then now you're living in the reality. And then it's very easy to be Krishna conscious. So that's the problem. And I think we don't study enough, we don't discuss philosophy enough, and then we don't study enough and discuss philosophy enough. We're not seeing that reality, we're seeing the material reality, and the material reality becomes the impetus towards material life. Seeing the spiritual reality becomes the impetus towards spiritual life. And so now, in this situation that we're in, we're looking at the world, and we need to try to see what's going on from a philosophical perspective. And that philosophical perspective will keep us calm and safe, even in spite of danger, even in spite of difficulty, which some of us may experience. We don't know who will or who won't. We may experience it, or someone we're close to may experience it. And it's not going to be easy. But I think it's important to know that really Prabhupada never said it would be easy. One time a devotee said it's hard to convince people of Krishna consciousness. And Prabhupada said, I never said it would be easy. When Prabhupada was in his last days in Vrindavan, or last month, he told the devotees something which I found interesting. Maybe it sounds kind of obvious and simplistic, but the more I think about it, the more interesting I find it. He said, don't think this won't happen to you, which means we were all, like, I was 27 when Prabhupada left. So, yeah. You know, when you're 27, dying is like at least 50 years away or so. 40, 50, 60 years away. So it's not something you think about. And Prabhupada is basically saying, you're also going to get old, and this is going to happen to you, even though now it doesn't seem to be a reality. So that's a philosophical way of looking at the world, isn't it? So we're looking at Prabhupada leaving his body, and he's saying, you want to see the reality here? The reality is someday it's going to be you. Now it's me. Someday it's going to be you. Don't think it's not going to be you, and don't think you can avoid this. And of course, we know that's true, but we don't know it's true. We only know it's true on paper. But in reality, we're trying to avoid it. So the more we discuss these things, said this is the reality, and the reality, what are the realities of this world, the difficulties of this world, and then we accept those difficulties as part of the nature of this world. And then we start discussing philosophically how those difficulties can help us understand our position in this world, how those difficulties can be an impetus to our Krishna consciousness. Then all of a sudden, the difficulties aren't so difficult. We actually see them as necessary or advantageous, helpful, or desirable even. Although we don't want them, but they're actually desirable in many ways, because if we're going through these difficulties and we're not Krishna conscious, it's going to be really difficult. And so when we go through these difficulties, in a sense, it forces us to be Krishna conscious. It forces us to ask questions like, why is this happening? What am I supposed to understand from this? And this is what we should be asking now. Why is this going on in the world? And what are we to understand? And I think, obviously, one of the things that it's on everyone's mind somewhere, on the front, or the middle, or the back, is that this thing could affect me, and if this thing affects me, and I get it in a few weeks, I could be dead next month, or the month after. And that's not the way we normally think. Unless you are seriously ill, you're not going to think that way. And now people are thinking that way. And so that's good. Now I'll tell you a story why that's good. Once, Prabhupada was asked, how do you become serious in spiritual life? And Prabhupada said, if you live every day as if it were your last day, then that's how you become serious. And so right now, I think a lot of us are thinking, potentially this could be my last day, my last days. I may not live more than a few months. I don't know. It just takes one infection, one person who carries it, and I get it, and my immune system can't fight it, and that's it. And maybe I'm in a city like New York and I can't get a respirator, and that's it. So is it helpful to think that way? If you think of that within a context of Krishna consciousness, you won't freak out. You'll just realize, yes, maybe I should be more serious about my spiritual life, because possibly in a few months I'll have to prepare to leave my body. That's the way we're supposed to think every day of our life. And if the virus helps you think of that, that's good. I think a lot of us are appreciating that we have more time at home. I think a lot of us are appreciating there are more classes online. And a lot of us are appreciating that our lives are hectic and crazy. And the air is a lot cleaner now. The world is a lot quieter. You can feel the world is calmed down. Can you feel it? Like when the world is working, you can feel that passion, that energy. There's much less of that energy, isn't it? So we can appreciate that. We don't appreciate the fact that so many people are dying. Of course not. But we do reflect on this. Like this is a warning. We were reading this morning, and Prabhupada was saying nature's law is stringent. You can't break it without suffering. And so this is a warning that we've broken some laws. Human society has broken some laws, and nature is reacting. And I hope people understand that. I don't know how well they understand it, but I hope they do. So now the question is, how well are you coping with all of this? And if you're not coping well, the question is, why? What's your reaction? What's your modality of reacting? And can you develop a healthier way of reacting? And I would say the best way, if you need to develop a healthier coping mechanism, is to live within the philosophy of Krishna consciousness and to see everything through that vision of Krishna consciousness. Here, I'll give you an example. Here's an example. This is, you'll find this interesting. I just read Carlos. Devotee came back to pay you after 10 years. What should I do? Well, take the money, because, it's... If you don't need the money, I'll take it. But take it because that will relieve him of the reaction of stealing from you. Even if you don't need it, just take it. Story says, I think I'm leaving my commission-earning job and starting a business. That is not all about money, but better quality of life. Yeah, it's transitioning is not easy. You have to, but the way the world's going, anyway, that would be ideal. If you can run your own business, that's ideal. But you have to weigh the pros and cons. 11th hour. 5 minutes to 12, that's the British. 5 minutes to 12, the 11th hour. Yeah, Krishna sometimes comes to help me in the 11th hour. I have to read your comments before I read what I was going to read. You were mistreated by a so-called devotee, right? It is not that if we tolerate mistreating from devotees and not exposing their bad behavior, we are letting them feel safe and continue mistreating other devotees. When ISKCON Guru sued a disciple who was falsely accusing him, this ISKCON Guru won in the court. Maybe that's the solution. Well, One devotee doesn't care because he's unscrupulous. One devotee, as you know, was terrorizing me and threatening me and making up stories about me, which that's fine if that's what they want to do, but it was disturbing others, so we had to quiet that devotee down by paying that devotee. So we did that, and I think that was the right thing, and she quieted down because it was unhealthy. I've spoken about this before. I think you asked the question. Actually, I spoke about it on a daily video. Should a devotee defend himself? And generally, our philosophy is no, don't defend yourself. That's depend on Krishna. But sometimes you will, because it's hurting other devotees, and it's hurting their faith, and then that is not good. So you may do that for that reason. And then another devotee who was dealing with me in harsh ways is not a mentally stable person, and everyone I talked to said that by dealing with this devotee will just become more disturbing, more angry, and so it's not worth it. So if someone is doing something which is breaking the faith of other people, yeah, then it's not a bad idea to retaliate. But also the followers of that person could retaliate, which is better. I saw Prabhupada retaliate, but only to defend the philosophy, to defend his actions philosophically, because he was being questioned about why he was doing something. So he wasn't defending his own integrity per se, he was defending his actions philosophically. So that could be there. Every situation is different. Kalanidi, all the way from Ukraine. Kishore Mani, all the way from Argentina. And we have many of you from India. But India now, it must be early in the morning, right? Okay. Ashwini says, we have been in lockdown from Thursday, midnight, for 21 days in South Africa. So we're still getting used to being in isolation. My husband and I think that it's Krishna's mercy for us personally to chant more and read Bhagavatam and with Krishna without being so rushed. Yes. We have more time to do service, and I think it's ultimately his plan for us to stop and take a breath and start remembering him. I have learned that Krishna is in control of everything, and we need to trust and have faith that he will get us through this. Yeah, a lot of people are saying this. People who aren't devotees just saying it gives us time to think, to reflect, and then some people are saying now they have to actually learn how to get along with their family because they've never spent so much time with their family before. Hare Krishna. Well, also, I think it's quite special time in the history of the world. And the nature of a devotee is that we will always try to utilize every situation as best we can. So I would encourage, just like Ashwini is taking advantage of it, all of you take advantage. Don't get distracted and spend your day playing video games or something. That would be such a loss, wouldn't it? Okay, so Kruti has a question. I wonder if this thing goes on a long time. I really wonder how nature is going to react. Is like finally you're going to be able to see blue skies in Delhi? How many weeks will it take before the air in Delhi clears up in the Indian cities that have, or any city that has very polluted air? And if it starts to clear up, it's going to be interesting that maybe if this thing goes on long enough, people will say, wait a minute, we don't want to start everything in motion again because now the air is clear, we're more peaceful. Who knows? But one thing I can say, this is just my observation, that if you were alive in America or if you were a teenager in America, at the time Prabhupada came, and you were asked about Prabhupada's timing, you would say, I don't think there was any better timing in the history of the universe for a Vaishnava to come from India to America to preach. No better, like there couldn't have been a better timing ever. There couldn't have been a better environment. That's what you would say. So it was a unprecedented historical change in the culture of the world, and that facilitated Prabhupada's preaching. The fall of communism facilitated, you could say communism facilitated the success in communist countries when communism fell, because people had been prevented from freedom of religion and freedom of knowledge, and they were hankering and anxious for it. And you can see different trends in society that facilitate people's spiritual yearning and facilitate people becoming interested in practicing Krishna consciousness. And so I always felt that whatever was going on in the world, whether good or bad, had some redeeming value in altering the consciousness of people in a way that they would be more open to spiritual principles. And if it's Krishna's desire that Krishna consciousness be successful, or people become more spiritual, then I think we have to see it that way, that he can use the bad karma and the sins of people to create situations in which they change, they learn, they grow. So we're going to get to this quote. Don't go anywhere. Just hold on. Okay. Kruti from Melbourne has a question. How do we develop more of an attitude of reliance and dependence on Krishna during this time? Well, I guess the question is, who else are you going to depend on? I mean, that's like, what is your choice? Choice A, freak out. Choice B, go hysterical. Choice 3, beat the walls down in your house. Choice 4, depend on Krishna. A lot of times when devotees ask me, I say, well, how do you remain in Krishna consciousness year after year after year? I say, well, list your other choices and the ramifications. Then I think the answer becomes more clear, easier to answer. What are your choices? So, I don't know, this is a difficult question for me to ask, and I'll explain why. Because when there's difficulty, my whole being, consciousness, heart, soul, mind, everything, naturally becomes more dependent on Krishna. So, to me, there's no part of my being that thinks that in times of difficulty, the solution is to take shelter in something else. Like what? Watch movies? Eat chocolate? I don't know. When you say, how do we develop more of an attitude of reliance? What else are we going to rely on? Okay, the government is helping us, this and that, but ultimately we see that as Krishna helping us. And as devotees, we're supposed to learn this attitude. Krishna, I'm yours, I've given myself to you. As I am your employee, and I know as your employee, you take care of your employees. You're the employer. That's how we have to train ourselves to think. And there are 6 items of surrender, which are given, I believe, in Chaitanya Charitamrita. And 2 of those items, faith that Krishna is my maintainer and faith that Krishna is my protector. Those are items of surrender. That's what it means to be a devotee. That's what it means to be surrendered. So, another way to answer your question is, dependence and reliance is a definition of a devotee. And who else are you going to depend on? That's another thing. You know, I put a quote up the other day on Facebook, and Prabhupada said, it's not the doctor who will cure you, he's only like an instrument or a vehicle. It's Krishna. Krishna who will cure you. So ultimately, it's not the government or the scientists or anyone who will save us. When Krishna deems that we've got our karmic reaction, then things will get better. That's the way karma works. If we're supposed to get a little wake-up call and a little pushing, and there's reactions that human society has to face, it will be faced. And then when Krishna wills, they'll find a vaccine or a cure. Or, some naturopath will discover, and you just eat grass and it goes away. Who knows? We were cleaning up we have many pine trees here, and there's going to be a wedding on our property tomorrow, and so devotees are cleaning up all the pine leaves. Pine? Not leaves, what do you call it? Pine? Pine needles, yeah. And I was joking, I said, maybe the cure is the pine needles. And we have enough pine needles to cure the world. So you never know, but when Krishna desires, he says, okay, this karmic thing is over, then someone will discover better ways to deal with this, or ways to prevent it, or whether it's a vaccine or new behaviors, or, one immunologist said it's vitamin A, that's the best thing. Vitamin A, vitamin D. So that's my understanding, and that's my experience. And if Kruti, if you want to live a very peaceful life, just see things like that. It's like, okay, this thing is in Krishna's hands, my life is in his hands, and things will work according to his plan. Now, for the sake of philosophical discussion, we could throw out another idea. I think I'll end it in 20 minutes. I seem to go an hour and a half, I don't know, so many questions. Is this going on as a karmic reaction to meat eating, and do innocent people and vegetarians have to suffer for the sins of others? That's an interesting question. And unfortunately, the answer is yes. Just being on this planet, we're intertwined in the karma of others. Just like parents get the karma of their children. They're intertwined. It's, the parent is suffering, but they didn't do anything because the child did something, or the husband gets the karma of the wife, or the guru gets the karma of the disciple. So there is exchange of karma. And you throw that into the questions, into the equation, and you throw that into your philosophical discussion of what's going on. And Prabhupada talks about innocent people suffering. There's a paradox, isn't it? Prabhupada talks about how certain people who are destroying the world make living intolerable for sane people. We have the example in Bhagavatam of bad kings. And these bad kings were thrown out of office by Brahmins or killed by Brahmins out of concern for the suffering that was being inflicted on the people. And they never said, well, it must be people's karma, so we'll just keep the king in so everybody gets their karma. Right? No, but because of that king, people were getting this collective reaction. And Prabhupada said that. You vote in a president, then he sends you to war. Well, that's the reaction for voting that person in now. Because you voted him in, that all these other negative things start happening. So that's interesting. It's an interesting meditation, isn't it? Although our goal is not to preach vegetarianism, but still, it's not that one of our goals isn't to stop animal slaughter. It is, because animal slaughter is responsible for so much suffering in the world. Not just for the cows, but for humans. And so we're concerned about that. There's another thing I think that would really help us. And this is, I think, a really important lesson to learn. And that's, it's very easy at times like this to be very concerned about myself, my family, my loved ones, how will we go on, how will we live, etc., etc. But as devotees, as Brahmins, as compassionate souls, quote unquote, we should be thinking about how we can help other people. And it's not necessarily that we'll be able to help anybody physically, but how can we help their consciousness deal with this? And so as you begin to meditate on how to help people, it relieves a lot of your own pain and a lot of your own fear and a lot of your own concerns about the situation, because now you're thinking outside yourself, you're thinking bigger than yourself. And at times like this, it's quite easy to become self-absorbed. What about me? What about my family? What about, how's it going to go on? What if I get sick? What will I do? Okay, these are natural concerns. But if we become too absorbed in that, to the extent that we don't give of ourselves to help guide other people or think about how to help other people, then number one, it's not good, and number two, it'll make it more difficult for us to cope. So this is another coping mechanism, is to give help, to give guidance, to give it reassurance. And then, Kruti, if you're going to give reassurance to people, if you're actually going to help people, how can you do it unless you were able to take shelter of Krishna and feel his protection and have confidence in his protection? You wouldn't be able to do it. So in order to help people, it's like it would force you to take shelter, because that's what you want to help other people do. It's kind of a long answer to that question, but I think it was important. Okay, so as you can see, it's hard to go systematic because Carla says her friend's thinking he's going to die, and that's why she got paid back. Sundari Radha knows who I was talking about. I don't think we can call him a devotee. Krishna Karshal said so-called devotee. I did a video on that the other day about so-called devotees. Divorce rates in China have gone up. Oh my God. I have to be home, stay home with this person. Now I realize how much I don't like the person. Or maybe they should realize how they require relationship skills and they're lacking. That is so interesting. That is amazing. Hare Krishna. You know, the Vedic perspective, it's not even, it's not just about liking the person, it's about working together for something higher. Radha Sundari Radha says, my work is better than ever because people's relationships are already suffering. She's a relationship coach. That is so interesting. Hare Krishna. So, Kruti says, I guess we were discussing before people will take shelter in their work or over-dependence on husband, wife, other relationships, yeah. Well, it's natural. I think, there's a natural human instinct to run away from reality and to take shelter in things which would enable you to stick your head in the sand. And that's the problem. And that's one of the reasons that so many people have found it difficult to accept Krishna consciousness, because we're just explaining reality. And we see that a lot of people will argue with reality, even though sometimes you're preaching and you're explaining something and it's not, they think it's just your idea, but you're just explaining this is how life is, and they argue with it. It's like, how can you argue with that? We're just explaining the reality of things. And so sometimes the reality is so unpleasant, they want to argue with it. Isn't it? Have you seen that? It's like, I don't want to think about it, I don't want to talk about it, I don't like you guys, you're pessimistic. And Prabhupada said, you should see with one good eye and you should see with one bad eye. See the pros, see the cons. All right, so there's some pros to life and there's some cons. And if we just focus on the cons of the pros, people think, yeah, you're optimistic, that's very good. But it's actually foolish, because you need to be focused on both. Otherwise, you can't make proper decisions. So, for us as devotees who are trying to detach from this world, if things are not perfect or things that don't go well, there's a side of us that says, well, even though I don't like it, it's actually helping me, and therefore it's good, because it's reminding me of the reality. And as I said, we're a little allergic to reality, and so if we can forget reality and just live blissfully ignorant, that's kind of the option most people choose, even devotees sometimes. So that's not the way Prabhupada taught us. The other day we were giving class on this, and we said, it's so interesting when something that Prabhupada taught over and over and over again actually happens. Like we know it happens, but it never happened to us, and now it happens to us, and it's unfortunate if it comes as a surprise to us, or it's unfortunate if we can't deal with it, when in fact Prabhupada has been preparing us to deal with it from the day we became devotees. He's been preparing us for calamities and disasters from the day we joined. But I think some of us are a little resistant to reality, so we don't like to look at it, we don't like to think about it. In fact, we had an interesting discussion, I think, of the first day I gave class was on a week ago, Sunday. We started giving class, and we wanted to give a class on something relevant to the situation. So I thought, well, let's just give a class on dying, because now death is around us. I think 600 people or 900 people died yesterday in Italy. So it's there. It's in the forefront. So I researched things Prabhupada said about dying, preparing for death, leaving the body, how a devotee leaves his body, how Krishna protects the devotee when he leaves his body, how life is a practice for Ante Narayana Smriti, remembering Krishna at the time of death. And then a few devotees said that this topic is like really difficult for me to talk about. I could never talk about it. And that's my point. That Prabhupada's talking about it, and there's this resistance to reality. We actually don't like reality. We like illusion. And we like illusion so much that Lord Brahma created enough illusion that we wouldn't even see the reality that's in front of our face. Did you know that? One of the main reasons we can't see reality is because Lord Brahma created self-deception so that we could think ourselves happy here. So, we came to this world to be happy, and Lord Brahma said, okay, you want to be happy? Let's create some illusion for you so that you can forget you're the body, you can forget that you're going to die, you can think you're a man or a woman, you think you'll be happy in this world, and then you can go after your phantasmagoria, your pie in the sky. And that's why reality is like hard to accept, because Brahma had to create all kinds of illusions just so we could stay here and engage in material activity, which is what we want to do. And if you see reality, it gets in the way of the desire of your ability to be optimistic about material life. But the point is, Prabhupada didn't want us to be optimistic about material life. And therefore, in Prabhupada's books, he's explaining the reality. He's explaining it actually how it is. Lord Brahma has us completely illusioned to think of it, to not be able to see the reality, although it's staring us in the face. And then Prabhupada on every page is saying, this is how the world is, this is how it is. And so, if you want to advance in Krishna consciousness, then you read Prabhupada's books and you just love it, because he's just describing exactly how it is, and then your life is now grounded in reality. There's no more playing, there's no more illusion, there's no more ignorance is bliss. And so if you have any of that ignorance is bliss mentality, you need to read more. You really do. It's really important. And you need to be able to relish all the things, all the horrible things about this world that Prabhupada will discuss. All the cheating that's going on, all the illusion that's there, the covering of the modes of nature and how we're affected by it. We need to discuss that and hear about it all the time. And then, it will be really good. And the more you discuss these things, just the better you'll be, the more in touch with reality you'll be. And that's where we're supposed to live. We're not supposed to live in a world of make-believe, because in order to be happy in the material world, you have to create a bit of a make-believe world. You have to create sufficient illusion. Because without sufficient illusion, you can't enjoy it. And if you want to enjoy it, then what? So Brahma says, okay, you want to enjoy it? We'll create an illusion that you can enjoy it. And as long as we paint this illusion, you'll actually experience happiness, some happiness. And because you won't see things as they are, it'll be kind of like you live in a make-believe world. And in that make-believe world, you can be happy. And then someday, pop, your balloon will be popped. The bubble of illusion will be popped, and then you'll suffer. But until then, you can think yourself happy. And then Prabhupada comes, and he's popping the illusion, but he's not popping it in real time. He's popping it before it happens. So when the bubble, then we don't even have the bubble. Or if we have a little bit of the bubble, when it's popped, we're completely ready for it. We knew it was going to happen. We weren't running away from it. So we like to get our bubbles popped. And if you don't want your bubble popped, you're going to have a hard time being Krishna conscious, because Prabhupada's the supreme bubble popper. The bubble of illusion. He pops every one of them. Every illusion that you could possibly have. Prabhupada has popped it in his books. So Prabhupada will not leave you any option other than surrendering to Krishna. Right? If you read Prabhupada's books, it's just like put you in a corner and you go, okay, all right, I surrender, okay. Because he'll just explain everything. Like you have no choice. And maybe, I don't know, I can't speak for everyone, but maybe some devotees, they don't like to read Prabhupada's books because the illusion gets popped. And they're like, I don't want my illusion popped. Could be, right? But if you're, you read the fifth canto is heavy, third canto is heavy, about materialistic people and so on. Then I remember as brahmacharis, we loved to read these things because that was the reality we lived in. We were renouncing the world, dedicating our lives to preaching. And so anything about how there was nothing in this world and everything was in the spiritual world was just music to our ears, because that gave us our impetus to continue in the reality. We weren't trying, we had left the illusion, and we just loved hearing about the reality. And even though the reality was not pleasant, so to speak, it was very inspiring for us because it helped us detach. So if you want to detach, then hearing about the reality is very inspiring. If you want to live in the bubble, then hearing about the reality just kind of rains on your parade, So some conviction has to be there that if I'm Krishna conscious, I'll actually be really happy. Not kind of like, well, I have to mix both of them together. All right, yeah, some material comfort is necessary, but not like a 50-50. That's not what Prabhupada wants. So, most of us did not get to associate with each other day after day after day. Now, we're getting association. If we make it through the virus or not, either way, I'm with Krishna. That's a good mantra. 24/7 with a 13-year-old, feeling that. Yeah. Guys are getting close, right? Or killing one another, one or the other. You have two choices. You'll destroy one another or you'll get closer. Yeah, I guess I wouldn't want to be a 13-year-old stuck inside, but I guess he can run around outside. I like, Christori says, like saying the change you want to see in the world. Be the change you want to see in the world. Yeah, that was actually an answer to a question. That wasn't a question. Prabhupada was dealing with a devotee more than once, a devotee who was complaining about the behavior of another devotee. And this is, of course, common. You see another devotee, especially a leader, acting in a way that's not representative of what Krishna would want, or what you think Krishna or Prabhupada would want, or what you know Krishna or Prabhupada would want. So, Prabhupada said, however you want that person to act, then you should act that way. And they will see that. And they'll be inspired by that. And I love that. It's like, why don't the leaders do that? You do it. Why don't devotees do this? You do it. Instead of saying, why don't they do it? Just do it. And let them see you doing it and inspire them. That's beautiful thought, isn't it? You like that? I love that. It's the best answer. It's like no better answer than that. But instead, many people lay into devotees and criticize them. Well, just be a better example. All right, my effulgence is coming in now from the other side. See if I can move out of the way. Okay. Krishna Karshani says, in Poland, people are joking about coronavirus will not kill us, we will kill each other because we're seeing together at home. So we will not be able to, the pressure of being all the time. I think the Indian families are probably happier. They're more family-oriented. Yeah, but that's funny. Okay, it's time to go, so I want to read that quote. Bruno's asking how we can help the world. By giving Krishna conscious solutions to the problems people are feeling now. There's a lot of stress, a lot of fear, difficulty, people are isolated, difficulty dealing with that. So we try to help them deal with, anybody you know, or you can post things on Facebook or write articles or whatever. That's the duty of Brahmins, to give knowledge. Kasturi's in bliss, being home all the time. I'm having a good time. This is my second class today, and then we're doing one more in an hour and a half. So, I'm accomplishing what I do when I travel by sitting one place. And it's not an easy, having a good time. Yeah, there's a purport where Prabhupada said you shouldn't work more than 8 hours a day. So if you work 8 hours a day, let's say it takes an hour to get to work, or half hour there and back. So, that's what my father did when I grew up. He just went to work at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock and came home 6 o'clock or 6:30. I think it was 8:30 to 6:30, something, So he was there in the morning for breakfast, and we only missed lunch with him, and then he was there every night, and we had dinner together every night, for 18 years until I left home. That used to be normal. Now, not so normal, I guess. Prabhupada is the supreme bubble popper. Yeah. Make a t-shirt. Sounds kind of like a Buddhist aphorism. Who's the supreme bubble popper? Who will pop your bubble? Yeah, it's true. Prabhupada's books are the supreme bubble pops. Can you talk about the tiny line between to know and be awake to reality and still live happy, and see reality and become depressed and negative? Hare Krishna. That's a whole topic. Can you ask that question tomorrow. Are you going to come to class tomorrow morning? And you would ask that question. So Paran Ananda says he has more time for hearing and chanting, and he also feels like he's in prison because he wants to interact with people. Yeah, so give some classes online or something like that. So let me read the quote before we go, and then maybe we can discuss this next week. This is a lecture Prabhupada gave, must have been in the late 60s. Hong Kong flu, yes. So everyone took that vaccination. So our Hayagriva Prabhu took me also. All right, let us have laughter. So Prabhupada got vaccination for the Hong Kong flu. So there was no attack. Fortunately, there was no attack. So similarly, this world is Hong Kong flu, laughter. Maya is always ready to attack, always. So we have to take the injection. This anti-vaccine, Hare Krishna. Enechi Oshodhi Maya Nashi Barodagi, Bhaktivinoda Thakur said, I brought the medicine, the holy name. Hare Krishna. All right, thank you for attending. If you are going to be around, then we've advertised the class tonight at 8 o'clock, which is 6:30. So it's an hour and a half. It's going to be translated into Spanish. Of course, I don't speak Spanish, so I will be speaking in English. So you can still hear it in English, and you can learn Spanish. And if you only know Spanish, those who only know Spanish, you can invite them if they'd like to come. And I think, I'm not sure it's going to be on Facebook or Zoom or whatever, but I think it was advertised on my Facebook page. Hare Krishna. Thank you. And so this is going to be regular for now. Sunday morning, 8 a.m. in Australia, or Saturday evening at 5 East Coast time. Morning class is 8 a.m. every day. I've given 7 classes since I started last Sunday. So 8 a.m. every day, and we've been reading what Prabhupada said about leaving the body. It's been very interesting. So yeah, and those classes should be on my Facebook page, the other classes. I find the topic extremely relevant and enlightening to see all the things Prabhupada has said. And just let me give you a thought, what I was thinking today. We talked about this a little bit. Let's say you're in a class and you've failed every quiz. So if you failed every quiz, what's the likelihood of you doing well in the final exam? Probably not, unless you cram or do something crazy. So life is full of quizzes, troubles, difficulties, like what we're going through now. Trying to get that light off me. What do I do to get it off? And I know what I do. Hold it. Just get rid of the light. Well, so life is full of quizzes, difficulties, and people attacking us, and disease, and setbacks, and those are all the quizzes. So you fail the quiz. How are you going to pass the final? So if we're failing in life, getting caught up in the dualities, and how are we going to pass the final exam? That's like the real thing, the real test. Okay, so that's a thought. We can talk more about that another time. Hare Krishna. Sorry for that. And I'll see you all later. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.